It has not been a good year for my favorite Asian-inspired Western animated franchises from the mid to late 2000s, in which one of my favorite characters from said franchise is an angsty warrior with daddy issues. Kung Fu Panda, a DreamWorks movie that needs no introduction. But I'll give it one anyway. What many initially wrote off as another Jack Black screwball comedy cashing in on the martial arts genre that blew up in American pop culture during the 2000s ended up being DreamWorks' most important film since probably Shrek. It has wonderful animation, even for today's standards, well-written characters, and some of the most creative action that I've ever seen from the Western animation scene. Of course, with success like this came two sequels that sought out to continue the main character Po's journey, which concluded with 2016's Kung Fu Panda 3, which brought an end to Po's character arc and ended the franchise on a satisfying note. But some executive at DreamWorks needed a new yacht, so Kung Fu Panda 4 How to Train Your New Dragon Warrior it is then. While I wasn't originally excited for what seemed to be an unnecessary sequel in a vast ocean of unnecessary sequels, I did become more on board with a continuation of the franchise as more information surfaced about the film. The film's villain reviving the original trilogy's villains, Po training a successor, and the film sharing the director with Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. Right? It sounded like a worthy revival to the series, especially with DreamWorks' track record at the time. So I went to see the film and... it's just okay. Hold up. Are you telling me that the fourth entry in a long-running action-adventure franchise was... underwhelming?
You sound surprised. Is it surprising?
You're watching the LionDog show, and I'm talking about Kung Fu Panda 4. Now, I will say this right at the start. This is a perfectly fine movie. If you're looking for a fun adventure film to watch over spring break, it's a good choice. But if you're looking for a film that feels like the proper next step for the Kung Fu Panda franchise, this is definitely not that movie, and it does not bring me any joy to tell you that. Before I delve into the complicated aspects or outright issues with this film, which will contain spoilers, I do want to go over some genuine positives. This might be a litmus test to determine whether this movie is for you, but the Awkwafina fox was the best part of the movie for me. The smartest decision that this movie made was choosing to grow Po's character in a direction that made sense. After mastering Chi, it felt like giving Po an apprentice was the next logical way to further grow his character, similar to how Shifu grew from teaching Po. And Po will definitely grow more patient from listening to Awkwafina. Okay, I'm an Awkwafina agnostic, so her voice didn't bother me that much, but I can see why she's often casted in comedic roles since her emotional moments in this film fell a little flat for me. Outside of her voice, I worried that Jen was just going to be Diet Diane Foxington before seeing this film, but that thought never entered my mind after her first appearance. She is the perfect apprentice to Po in how they're both similar and dissimilar. Both of them have similar upbringings despite growing up in completely different environments and under different influences. While she shares Po's laid-back personality, her jaded views and rebellious actions complement Po's optimism and pacifism to a T, which leads to them having solid chemistry. Platonic chemistry. I can easily see these two either being on the same page or being at each other's throats, which gives Jen room to develop in the future. A detail perfectly demonstrated by the final shot of the film that parallels the post-credit scene of the original film, showing the progression of Po in the beginning of Jen's journey. As you'll find out, this film gets quite a few things about the franchise wrong, but this is one detail of the franchise that I'm glad that they included. Speaking of Po's allies, I might be against both the fans and some of the filmmakers on this one, but I appreciate the lack of the Furious 5 in this film. I understand that they often get sidelined in the later films and most supplemental material, but I found it necessary to give Jen an opportunity to establish herself as a new main character. Besides, having them perform off-screen missions is honestly more respectful than them being quickly defeated by the main villain, which, let's face it, most likely would have happened. Back to Po and Jen, the tavern fight scene is easily the best scene in the film. It felt the most like a fight scene from the original trilogy without stealing set pieces or jokes from the earlier films. The way the tavern's foundation shifted and caused the furniture to move during the fight was creative, and it led to some good jokes sprinkled throughout the scene. The score is as good as you would expect from the franchise, but I did want to bring attention to the score's rendition of Crazy Train during the chase through Juniper City. If studios are hell-bent on using licensed songs in every movie released, they should find ways to adapt the songs to blend into the scene rather than it sticking out like a sore thumb like a certain other animated movie with Jack Black. Speaking of which, while his cover of Hit Me Baby One More Time is excellent, the song selection fits Bowser way more than it does Po. It feels like it belongs more during a Shrek 2 style climax of the second Super Mario Bros. Movie than during the end credits of a Kung Fu Panda film. But it's still a fun way to wrap up the film. And that's it! I could only find 4 genuine positives in the Kung Fu Panda film. Only 4. If that isn't very telling of the quality of this film, I don't know what is. Okay, let's jump into the messy side of this film. From here on out, there will be spoilers, so if you haven't seen the film yet, have a great day and stick around for more. Let's get negative. I doubt that I'm alone in saying that most issues that I have with this film stem from one specific aspect: the film's tone. This film is a comedy, and it never lets you forget that fact. Now, I don't have an issue with comedy films. My next review is on one that I enjoy. But dude, these animals are not very funny, and they don't make me want to merge without looking. I can count the amount of times that I chuckled on a single hand, and the only joke that truly got an audible laugh out of me was one involving a pelican. When the jokes weren't recycled from previous films, they were the most placeholder jokes you can imagine. Those violent bunnies feel like a joke from 2005, not 2024. Seriously, Metro Man, read words, kids, is funnier than the entirety of this movie. Now, normally I wouldn't mind a couple of misfired jokes. I'll be honest and say that Puss in Boots: The Last Wish isn't all that funny of a film, but I still think it's great regardless. The issue with this film, however, is that its comedy seems to take priority over the drama that made the series so beloved. Interesting concepts that should be explored emotionally, like Poe transitioning into the role of spiritual leader, are played off more as running gags than character arcs. Throughout the film, Master Shifu wants Poe to behave in his role by seeking peaceful solutions to conflicts and by offering words of wisdom, both of which not only lead to unfunny jokes, but also do not make sense for Poe's character. Does Shifu even know how Poe handled both Tai Lung and Shen? Not only did he show compassion towards them, one of which being the one who killed his mother, but he also offered them sound wisdom. Only when they denied both did Poe kill him, and in Shen's case, Poe didn't even kill him, he killed himself. Even in the context of the film, this arc doesn't make sense. In the tavern scene, Poe tries to prevent the fight while Shen continues to instigate it. It feels like such an unnecessary arc. If they wanted to give Poe an arc about him taking on the role of spiritual leader, it would have fit his character better if he believed that he had to fit the archetype of a spiritual leader like Uwe, but fails miserably at it. And only when he stops trying to make a good impression and speaks from the heart is he able to help Jen find her true potential. Sure, that's a bit of a retread of his arc in movie 1, but at least it isn't entirely out of character. Outside of maybe one scene between Poe and Jen, there's very little heart to this movie until the third act, where it feels like it's only there because that's what every animated film does in its third act. This is so unlike the original films. Sure, they had their fair share of comedy, that's just what you sign up for when you cast Jack Black as your lead, but the film still focused on the different emotions the characters experienced during their journey, with the comedy serving as a nice break from the drama. Even the third film, the most overtly comedic in the series prior to now, still had time for emotional moments. The scene between Poe's adopted dad and his biological dad is one of the most heartwarming scenes in the series to me, and I'm not even adopted! The only scenes that came close to that were maybe when Jen hugs Poe and when Tai Lung accepts that Poe deserved the title of Dragon Warrior. Those could have been hard-hitting scenes if it weren't for another issue: this film's pacing. How is it possible for a film to be so bloated yet so empty? I keep hearing people suggest that this film should have been longer. If anything, it should be shorter because it feels like this film is constantly throwing new locations and characters in the audience's faces for no better reason than to keep them entertained. Apathy is a tragedy and boredom is a crime in this movie's eyes. This film is extremely back-heavy, with a lot of adventure fluff and comedy filling up the first two acts and all the drama and character development being shoved into the third act. It feels like the second film if it took Poe and the Furious 5 half the film's runtime to reach Shen because they kept getting distracted with silly pit stops, yet they still crammed the rest of the film after they reached the city into the remaining runtime. There are so many action set pieces that don't push the plot forward and aren't even that unique, with the exception of the aforementioned tavern scene, which would be better off as a short film attached to a different movie. Because of this, despite feeling like a lot is happening, nothing happens. I feel like the only reason Jen betraying Poe as predictable of a twist as it was surprised me was because I was so bored that any sort of genuine plot progression was enough to get me invested in the film again. Another attribute to this movie feeling so stuffed were all the unnecessary subplots. While Mr. Ping is an angel and Lee is a decent character as well, their subplot just felt like retreading jokes from 5 minutes ago that weren't even funny the first time. The most they do in the film is save Poe from falling, but were they really needed there? Poe survived a blast from a cannon. I'm pretty sure a fall would be a mere stub of his toes compared to that. Also, the reasoning for going after Poe makes little sense. Going back to the second film, Mr. Ping had no problem sending Poe to fight a murderer. Lee also mentions that Poe has faced both demons and demigods, yet a shapeshifter whose most dangerous action was pushing someone down the stairs is too much for a kung fu master? Also, Poe throwing hands with Percy Jackson sounds like a way better movie. The Den of Criminals also didn't didn't do a lot for me. They just felt like an unnecessary detour for the sake of a funny moment. Neither of these subplots lead anywhere. The closest they come to doing something is Ping's lesson to Po near the end. Outside of that, neither party contributes to the third act. Sure, both fight off the guards, but it's not like they were an issue. Po got past them just fine on his own, and he's horrible at stealth, so why couldn't Jen sneak past them? She's a thief, that's her whole shtick! Maybe they distracted the guards so they couldn't fight Po and Jen, but there are other options of characters who could fight off the guards. Perhaps a group of warriors that includes 3 characters that the audience already knows and maybe likes? Even the main plot doesn't feel natural, like how the plot's catalyst feels so forced. Po hears rumors that
somehow
Tai Lung
returned,
and for his investigation of this, he looks to a criminal for information that gives him the idea to take said criminal on a journey that, get this, was a trap all along. This easily surpasses Po cooking rice in his stomach as the dumbest decision that he's ever made. Did it ever occur to him how she knew all this? Gee, if only there was a way for Po to believe that someone important to him was in danger, motivating him to go on a journey to prevent this from happening, but in classic Kung Fu Panda fashion, his attempts to prevent this prophecy only fulfill it, leading to this important character playing a role in the climax and reuniting with a character who's important to him. Oh well, at least we got a vision that's played as a joke, because this franchise is a comedy, you fool. If you even thought about performing the action of shedding a tear while watching a Kung Fu Panda movie, you're the loser. These are animated films. It's not like animation is a medium that gives directors the freedom to enhance the emotions of a scene in ways that can't be done in live action. It can only make things funnier. So laugh, you monkeys, laugh! They say it's the best medicine, so if you're not laughing, you're probably dead inside! Okay, let's discuss something way less frustrating before I lay waste to the value of peace. How about the presentation? It goes without saying that the animation of this film looks far superior to its predecessor from 8 years ago, but I don't know, it just feels too colorful and cartoonish. And I understand that Western animated films have been moving away from realism since the original Spider-Verse, but the original 3's balance between realism and stylized visuals fit the tone of the series. While you could make the argument that the slight shift in art style fits the tone of this film, it also intensifies how disconnected this film feels from the original trilogy. The Valley of Peace looks almost unrecognizable from the earlier films. This isn't the Valley of Peace! This is the uncanny Valley of Peace! The presentation isn't the only part of this film that feels off. It's funny how a movie with a main villain who pretends to be other people features main characters who feel like other people posing as them. Po in this film is Po at his least serious. During recent rewatches of the trilogy, I've begun to theorize that Po has ADHD, and the 4th movie all but confirms that. Sure, Po had his fair share of goofy moments in the previous installments, but those were never to the extent of him getting caught up in a Studio Ghibli food Twitter moment. At least that fits his character a lot more than acting full of himself, which he also does in this movie. Po never bragged about being the Dragon Warrior. In fact, that's what I believe made him a perfect fit for the role. He never cared about glory, power, or vengeance. He simply loved both Kung Fu and helping people. It feels like he's only acting this way to fit his arc of passing the position to Zhen. On that note, Shifu being so against Zhen becoming the Dragon Warrior sounds so unlike him after seeing what Po became. I understand being a little unsure about a mob boss's second-in-command taking on the mantle, but I'm sure he would trust Po's judgment enough to not visibly show his disdain. It feels like the team of this movie wrote it backwards. Instead of writing the jokes and arcs for the characters, they wrote the characters for the jokes and arcs. This out-of-character behavior isn't limited to main characters either. You're telling me that no one outside of the Valley of Peace has heard of Po? He has done a ton of traveling. This guy defeated a tyrant from a highly populated city, for crying out loud. Once again, this feels like this decision was only done for the sake of jokes. Well, joke's on you, I didn't laugh! When Po said that he was the Kung Fu Panda, my soul left my body, and it plummeted down to hell. Also, the Spirit Realm has got to have free breakfast and Wi-Fi, because not a single warrior brought out of the Spirit Realm wanted to stay in the mortal realm. Sure, it makes for a quicker resolution, because heaven forbid we make a longer movie, but I find it highly unlikely that none of them had unfinished business or a family they would like to see again. Okay, so the returning characters and the side characters aren't as good as they used to be, but what about the new characters in this film? I already discussed Jen, so we'll move over to her adopted mother in this film's antagonist,
The chameleon. champion.
If there's one thing that Kung Fu Panda is known to have, it's iconic villains, so I was excited to see how the Chameleon compared to our previous adversaries. Her and Kai are out here fighting it out for my least favorite villain in the series. Now, in terms of Megamind standards, she's quite the supervillain. Her presentation is phenomenal. She has an appealing reptilian design, and Viola Davis's performance as her elevates the material the film gave her. I also appreciate how she continues a series tradition of every villain having a connection to a member of the Jade Palace lineage. Kai was connected to Oogway, Tai Lung was connected to Shifu, Shen was connected to Po, and the Chameleon was connected to Zhen. Like I said, this film gets a lot wrong about the franchise, but this decision was so good that it had to be unintentional. I guess there are no accidents after all. Outside of those parts, yeah, she's a pretty disappointing villain, and that's mostly due to her motivation. Now, allow me to play devil's advocate for a moment to explain why it works on paper. She was written to be a dark version of Po, which is a good place to start since both Tai Lung and Shen mirror Po in terms of sharing the same internal struggles throughout their respective movie. The Chameleon is a bit of a different case in that she mirrors Po in terms of backstory, with her being rejected by Kung Fu masters and turning to sorcery, showing both what Po could have become if he didn't have Oogway to encourage him, and showing why Po needs to take on the title of spiritual leader and train Zhen. Also, maybe I'm looking too deep into a film that doesn't deserve such deep analysis, but her name being her species fits with how many of the warriors mentioned in this franchise are named after their species. Like, she could have become Master Chameleon if someone gave her a chance. This would be an interesting backstory if not for her reasoning for being rejected making zero sense. The reason she was rejected by her masters was because she was too small. She could hold Mantis like a Subway sandwich. The reason Shifu and the Furious Five initially hated Po wasn't the fact that he was a panda, it was the fact that he had zero training. This is yet another example of the film's higher-ups not understanding the original films at all. It also doesn't help that this is the only side of the story we hear. With Tai Lung, we initially hear from Tigress about how he attacked the village and tried to steal the Dragon Scroll after not receiving the title of Dragon Warrior. Based on this, the viewers assume that Tai Lung is just a narcissist, but when you hear his side of the story, you learn how he felt betrayed by Shifu, who did nothing to support him after finding out that his life's work, which Shifu placed upon him might I add, was all for nothing. Suddenly his actions, while not entirely excusable, make a lot more sense. In Tai Lung's case, and in a lot of cases in real life, hearing multiple perspectives gives people a better understanding of the situation. For all we know, the Chameleon was just bad at Kung Fu, or was heading down a dark path like Tai Lung. Something that could have easily fixed this would be a simple flashback, something all three previous villains received. If she can have a connection to a Jade Palace warrior, why can't she have a flashback showing her failing at Kung Fu, her fellow students making fun of her behind her back, and her not having an Oogway figure to support her? The animators for this film had time to animate a Dune parody commercial, but not time to animate a flashback for the main villain? I guess that's what you get when your main villain didn't have a backstory until after the second test screening. How do you make a Kung Fu Panda villain without a motivation? Motivation is the location of a Kung Fu Panda villain. Another thing missing is a sense of humanity in her. A villain in this series without any trace of genuine emotion is like Mr. Ping not putting nothing into his secret ingredient soup. Even Shen, a genocidal tyrant, still had the decency not to kill Michelle Goat since he still cared for her. Even Kai, Manny's least favorite villain until the Chameleon, still traveled across China to find a way to heal Oogway. The Chameleon cares for nobody but herself, not even her own daughter. She's just Zhen's evil stepmother and nothing more. I understand that abusive parents exist, but you would think that a woman who is motivated by rejection would be a bit hesitant to hurt someone who obeyed her enough to damage a loving friendship. It would have been better to have Zhen and the Chameleon be an inverse of Tai Lung and Shifu, where a loving parent-child relationship fell apart due to the parent going down a dark path. Maybe have her go on a flawed yet selfless quest to eliminate Kung Fu, believing that its masters are corrupt and unfit of their skills, or that Kung Fu has done more harm than good. Have her find a way of removing removing one's abilities by absorbing them into her. But as she continues this quest, she ironically becomes more corrupt with the power and causes more harm than good. Anything is better than an evil for evil's sake villain. Even with her skill set, she leaves a lot to be desired. For being a shape-shifting villain, they do not utilize how mind-screwy that concept can be, with it only being seen twice. Also, the film's director talked about how cool it was to have a supernatural villain in the series, as if Kai wasn't a warrior from the dead. Yet, just like Kai, the chameleon uses her supernatural abilities just to perform kung fu rather than as its own form of combat. It would be so much more interesting to see a physical fighting style clash with a mythical fighting style, much like how kung fu clashed with Shen's weapon-based fighting style. Even her color scheme is a mess. I know she's supposed to feature the main color of each of the original 3 villains, but it leads to her not fully establishing her own identity. While I appreciate the hints of gold, I wish they stuck with an entirely gold color scheme, as it would have driven home how she could have been a great warrior with the proper guidance. Which is exactly what they did with Tai Lung by giving him orange eyes. There is nothing original about this woman at all. This drives home the fact that she's essentially just the 3 original villains blended together. She got rejected by her masters like Tai Lung, she leads an army and steals metal for her plot like Shen, and she steals the power of deceased warriors like Kai. Seriously, is the only original idea that this woman ever had child abuse? You know, the chameleon is just the perfect summary of this movie. She's perfectly fine on the surface, but she's derivative and full of wasted potential underneath. But she shouldn't matter, right? After all, she's just the vehicle to bring back the villains from the original trilogy. They have to be as great as they used to be, right? Hope you have a thing for cages. For context, if you couldn't tell, Tai Lung is one of my favorite characters from this franchise, right behind the big fat panda himself Po and the chat among dads Mr. Ping. So seeing him all over the marketing for this film got me pumped for it. They had to be giving him a redemption arc. Surely they won't just give closure to his inner turmoil of trying to live up to his own high expectations of himself imprinted on him at a young age by his adopted father's pride in him within a few lines of dialogue, will they? They freaking did. If you wanted to see this movie just because you assumed Tai Lung would play a major role in it based on his presence in the marketing, then I have got some bad news for you. He only shows up in the 3rd act. But how are his scenes? You know, it's pretty ironic how, of all the returning characters, most of which have been in all of the movies since the beginning, the most consistent character in this movie is Tai Lung. Though that might be since he has such little screen time. He's still cocky, but he lacks a ton of that ambition and rage under the hood, which I could buy since he might have mellowed down in the spirit realm. Tai Lung went from aggressive to passive-aggressive. A+ character growth. One thing that I can't buy is how quickly he gets defeated in a chamber by a few guards when compared to him breaking out of a prison designed especially for him. He should be walking right out of there, only occasionally throwing a punch. Instead, he spends most of the remainder of the film in a cage. If I wanted to pay $10 to watch a snow leopard in a cage, I'd go to the zoo to see one, and maybe ride the SpongeBob 4D ride while I'm at it. While we're on the subject, guys, I implore you, guess. Take a wild shot in the dark. Guess who just so happens to be caged right next to Tai Lung? Why, it's none other than Scott. Who names a fire-breathing kung fu warrior crocodile from China Scott? Anyway, I should probably mention Peacock and Omni-Man. To the legion of Shen fans and all 4 Kai fans, you should probably watch a different movie, because neither Gary Oldman or J.K. Simmons reprise their roles. Neither character even speaks. But hey, at least they didn't use AI. For the voice cast, I understand that they were last-minute additions, but if their inclusions were this weak, then it feels like an insult having them in the film in this state, because it makes me think of what they could have done with them. Have the 3 villains be cage neighbors and banter about which of them got the closest to defeating Po. Or have Tai Lung pluck one of Shen's feathers and use it to pick their locks to join in on the final battle. The cage warriors do eventually join the final battle, right? Well, this film makes a bold move. Most films have the massive army arrive at the start of the climax. If they want to be more dramatic, they'll have the army show up halfway through the climax. But this film, ho-ho! This film's special. They have the army of glowing warriors standing side by side arrive after the final battle. How do you not have the glowing warriors consisting of some of the series' most iconic characters, and Kai, and not have them fight. I know that big CGI final battles are so played out, but having the original 3 villains fight alongside both our original hero and new heroine would have been a nice way to cap off the original 3 films and officially begin anew. Have Tai Lung and Po fight together. Have Kai and Oogway fight together again. Or have Po introduce Shen to Lord Shen and have him be like, Shen, this is Shen. Shen, this is Jen. It feels like this movie is both indulging itself in fan service while simultaneously avoiding it. But hey, I did get my Tai Lung redemption arc. I think. I will admit that seeing Tai Lung give Po his blessing as the Dragon Warrior got me a little emotional, but that's because I have the context of the original film. Within only the context of this movie, Tai Lung's arc, I guess, comes off so insincere. Like I mentioned earlier, it feels like he's let go of most of his anger in the spirit realm, so all that's left for him to do is acknowledge that Po deserved the title more than he did. With most of that growth happening off screen, the growth of him that we do see leaves little impact. Also, it doesn't help that there's no serious action that demonstrates his growth. It's only portrayed through dialogue. Because of both of these aspects, Tai Lung comes off more like a school bully than a threatening enemy, and that ultimately leads to his reconciliation with Po feeling less like Zuko joining Team Avatar and more like that scene at the end of Home Alone where Buzz compliments Kevin for not burning the house down. Lastly, where in the world is Master Shifu? I know that Tai Lung's rivalry with Po is an important part of his character in the first film, but it was a rivalry that lasted only a few days, and they only interacted face to face for maybe 10 minutes. On the other hand, Shifu raised him and, for better or for worse, made him everything that he is. Wouldn't him and Shifu reuniting on good terms be the proper end to his story? Once again, I'm left asking myself if the filmmakers even watched the original movies. With the concept of bringing closure to legacy characters, there's an obvious comparison you can make between this movie and Spider-Man No Way Home. Say what you will about that film removed from the hype, but you cannot deny that the filmmakers were passionate about the characters that they brought back in the films from which they originated. Now, I didn't really want Kung Fu Panda 4 to be that kind of film, since I'm getting sick of legacy sequels relying on being glorified reunion specials, but that would at least give these characters more of a reason to be here and treat them with respect. The problem with this film isn't that it disrespects these characters, it's that it doesn't respect these characters. To the higher-ups, these well-written characters who thousands, maybe millions, have grown up loving are nothing more than Easter eggs. They simply don't care. I feel like that's the best way to describe this film. It doesn't care about its own franchise. And a lot of that apathy can be traced to one person, the film's lead director Mike Mitchell, who did not direct Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, by the way. You probably have already heard about this, but in case you haven't, Kung Fu Panda 4's co-director Stephanie Mastine did a Q&A shortly after the film came out, and if it's to be believed, Mitchell pushed hard for this film to be a comedy, while Stein and the rest of the crew wanted this film to stay true to the first 2 movies' tone. And after learning about that, this movie makes a lot more sense.
We wanted it to be epic. We wanted it to be a great story. We wanted to further Poe's adventure. We wanted him to learn a lesson, to have a great theme. Adding to that, we wanted to have an incredible villain.
Sure.
Now, Mike Mitchell could be a fine guy, but he is not a team player, and he is certainly not aware of what makes Kung Fu Panda such a celebrated franchise to the point that it received a 4th entry 16 years after the original's debut. This feels like it was made by someone with a surface-level knowledge of the series, like someone who watched the first film once when they were 9, someone who sees comedies with a dash of drama rather than dramas with a dash of comedy, sees characters as springboards for jokes or Easter eggs rather than beloved multi-dimensional people, and sees villains as obstacles rather than as heroes who made the wrong decisions. The first 3 films were films for everyone. Sure, they starred animated animals and their lessons came from aspects of Chinese culture, but anyone, regardless of age, culture, or religious or philosophical beliefs, could walk away from them learning an important life lesson. The 4th film is only for kids and 20-something autistics who get giddy when they see Daddy Issues Snow Leopard in a trailer. Like I said at the top of the video, this isn't an irredeemable movie. The 2 main characters have good chemistry, some of the fight scenes are entertaining, and I think it lays a solid foundation for the franchise going forward. It's about as good as the Super Mario Bros. Movie, but I expect a simple adventure movie from the first Mario movie in years from the studio behind Minions. Not from a franchise that started its 2nd film with a panda genocide. I don't think this is a franchise killer. More like a franchise sender to the emergency room. I want to be optimistic, I really do. The idea of a second trilogy where Poe trains as an apprentice has a ton of potential if done well, and I would hate for that idea to get thrown away over a 6 out of 10 film. I want to believe they'll learn. But then again, this is Hollywood. If this film succeeds, Universal will most likely continue to milk the franchise based on the charisma of the lead actor, like what happened with Pirates of the Caribbean, and if this film even slightly underperforms, the story will go nowhere, like what happened with Rise of the Guardians. For the time being, I'll give this film a pass, but they better get their act together if we even get a movie 5 based on the state of the studio. Guys, it's time to stop living a fantasy. There is no Easter Bunny, there is no Tooth Fairy, there is no Queen of England, and there is no DreamWorks Renaissance. See you on the other side, DreamWorks. But before I go, let me give you something to chew on. If you even think about screwing up Bad Guys 2, then you will be chewing on my fist! Okay, that's enough martial arts bear for one day. All this talk of a thievish fox has me in the mood to watch a classic Disney film. You've been watching The LionDog Show. Have a great day, and stick around for more.